The night of the president's inaugural ball, the residents had called for service twice. The third time, it was Sam who went. The new First Lady, Clara, startled, shrinking into Julian's arms. She asked in a hushed tone why a man was serving them. Julian's sharp gaze cut through the dim light of the bedroom. Seeing it was Sam, a cruel smirk played on his lips. He was just a no-gut staffer, hardly a man. If his presence was unsettling, Julian suggested, they could have him reassigned to the scullery, so he wouldn't frighten her again. As Julian spoke, he raised a hand to gently pat his new wife's fragile back, his voice a soft murmur of pure devotion. Sam knelt on the cold marble, his eyes involuntarily fixed on that hand. Only yesterday, Julian had used that same hand. The searing palm had moved over Sam's body with a calculated harshness, tracing his spine inch by inch before clamping onto the nape of his neck, forcing his head back to meet eyes flushed with desire. Julian had asked him what he was crying for, whether it was from pleasure or from the fear that a wife would mean he would be discarded. He told Sam not to worry. He explained that no matter how beautiful or brilliant the First Lady was, she was merely a pawn from Senator Prescott, meant to secure an alliance. He would always, he had promised, come back to Sam. He had chuckled, his breath hot against Sam's earlobe as he bit down gently. His voice had dropped to a husky whisper, telling Sam that no one else could ever indulge him the way he did. Julian had grown up at Blackwood, a state-run home. Though he carried the blood of a political dynasty, he had known only neglect and cruelty. Perhaps that upbringing had forged the viciousness in his bones. Even now, elevated to the highest office and swathed in designer suits, he kept that viciousness leashed. But in front of Sam, who had witnessed every degradation, he remained artlessly brutal, laying bare the foulest of his appetites without a shred of pretense. 6 months ago, the former president had died suddenly, a hedonist who had bankrupted the public trust on lavish projects. He left behind a fractured nation and a circle of power-hungry politicians, but no clear successor. The party was in chaos until they unearthed Julian, the forgotten bloodline, from the depths of the state system. The night before the inauguration, Sam had personally fitted Julian into his heavy, custom-tailored suit, believing their struggles were finally over. But Julian had taken his hand and informed him that he had to marry Senator Prescott's daughter. A tidal wave of emotions crashed through Sam. He first managed a numb congratulations, then after a long silence, asked if, for the sake of their shared past, Julian might let him leave his service. Julian had frozen for a second, then a low laugh escaped him as his fingers closed around Sam's throat. His gaze was dark and unyielding. He had told Sam that unless he was dead, Sam would never dream of leaving the residence or him. The scullery was worse than Sam had imagined. It was the dead of winter, and the icy water was agonizing. By the time he finished scrubbing the mountains of pots and pans, night had fallen. He dragged his frozen body back to the staff dorms. Before he could push the door open, he heard raucous laughter from within. One of the valets was saying how spoiled the First Lady was. She had casually mentioned missing the cherry blossoms of the Pacific Northwest. And the president had chartered a private jet to fly in a grove of budding trees, using heat lamps to force them into bloom in the middle of a D.C. winter. Another scoffed, saying that was nothing. The inauguration was the real spectacle. The diamond necklace she wore, with a centerpiece stone the size of a robin's egg, was rumored to be a diplomatic gift secured by destabilizing a small island nation. Then a thin, reedy voice lowered conspiratorially, dripping with undisguised scorn. He wondered what had become of that other one, the one who used to walk around with his nose in the air, thinking he was special because of his connection to the president. Now he was sleeping in the same room as the rest of them. Another voice shushed him to be quiet in case Sam overheard. The first voice replied with contempt, asking what was there to fear from a neutered aide who had lost all his influence. Sam stood frozen outside the door as the wind whipped bits of sleet against his face like tiny knives. After a long moment, he slowly pushed the door open. The room fell instantly silent. A dozen pairs of eyes, some pitying, some mocking, fixed on him. He said nothing, simply sweeping a cold gaze across them. He had been Julian's chief aide for long enough that his stare still carried a sliver of authority. They fell silent and looked away. He walked to the empty cot in the far corner and lay down, still in his clothes. The mattress was thin and lumpy, used by countless others before him, and smelled faintly of mildew. But he had no other choice. He curled into a tight ball, pulling the threadbare blanket around him. The cold seemed to seep into his thoughts, making them sluggish and confused. He found himself remembering the years at Blackwood. He remembered the countless nights he and Julian had huddled together, sharing a single thin blanket, drawing a pathetic amount of warmth from each other's bodies. Sleep would not come. He opened his eyes and stared at the dark ceiling, a bitter, silent smile twisting his lips. He was pathetic. Even now, he was still thinking of him. Julian was no longer the wretched boy from Blackwood who had begged for his protection. He was the president, commander of a vast nation, warm in the arms of his beautiful wife. And Sam was nothing. A cast-off aide, growing older, his usefulness expended. He was thrown here to endure the scorn of others on a hard, unforgiving cot. If he had known it would come to this, he never would have been so soft. It was Sam's 5th year working at Blackwood. Through a combination of subservience and ruthless ambition, he had clawed his way to the position of facility supervisor. It wasn't a grand title, but it gave him a measure of control over the lives and comforts of others in that sunless place. It was a normal afternoon. Another resident had died, a young woman who had been briefly favored by a wealthy patron and then just as quickly abandoned. Sam took 2 junior staffers to deal with the body. In a dilapidated, gloomy corner of the grounds, next to the emaciated corpse, he saw Julian for the first time. The boy should have been 10, but he was as small and frail as a child of 6 or 7, wrapped in a filthy coat of an indeterminate color. The skin of his face was a sickly white from lack of sun. If it hadn't been broad daylight, Sam would have thought he'd stumbled upon a ghost. Julian had explained his situation concisely, telling Sam he was the 9th and unacknowledged son of the former president. Born in secret at the facility because his mother had feared the jealousy of the president's official wife. The world of the powerful was full of sordid secrets. Sam was not surprised. He simply looked the boy over, asking if he expected to be presented before the president to claim his birthright. Julian shook his head. He knew that as a child with no allies, being acknowledged would only make him a target. He then looked Sam straight in the eye, his voice holding a maturity that defied his age. Julian reasoned that his father's acknowledged children were numerous but sickly. He proposed that if Sam were to bet on him now, offer him a little help, they could one day make a play for the ultimate prize. He stepped closer, a desperate courage in his young voice that was surprisingly persuasive. He promised he was easy to keep. A bowl of soup and a warm place to sleep were all he needed to survive. He swore that if he ever reached the summit of power, he would not forget Sam's kindness and would repay him 1,000 times over. Later, during countless nights of tangled limbs and whispered secrets, Sam had once held Julian's sweat-slicked back and asked him why he had been so bold that day, why he had chosen to latch onto him. Julian, still drowsy and pliant from their lovemaking, had mumbled his reply into Sam's neck, his breath scaldingly hot. He confessed he had been watching Sam for a long time. He knew Sam was ambitious and craved power, that he had even debased himself to get his supervisor position. Julian had calculated that for someone so pragmatic, the small risk of sheltering a boy for the potential of immense future wealth and influence was a gamble he wouldn't refuse. It was true. It had seemed like a sure thing. But there was no such thing as a sure thing. Hiding a claimant to a political dynasty was a capital offense. The vague promise of future glory was paid for with more than a decade of constant fear, of knowing that exposure meant certain death. A man like Sam, who only wanted to survive, should never have gotten involved. But at that moment, when he had looked down into the boy's eyes, red-rimmed from suppressing both terror and hope, a flicker of compassion he thought had been extinguished by years of hardship stirred unexpectedly. Sam washed dishes for 2 weeks straight. His hands, constantly submerged in the harsh water, soon developed painful chilblains. At first they itched, then they ached, and finally, after they went numb, the sores broke open and wept, forming ugly scabs. He showed his ruined hands to the kitchen manager, stating that he couldn't wash dishes anymore. He didn't mind the pain, but the patrons would certainly find it disgusting. The manager, with a flick of his towel and a disdainful glance, gave him a new job. The new task was night watch. It was still miserable work, but better than washing dishes. He was cold, but at least his back didn't ache. One night, as the wind howled and drove the snow, Sam huddled over a small security lantern, trying to warm a stale roll he had taken from his pocket. Just as he was about to take a bite, it was snatched from his hand. He looked up to see Julian, whom he hadn't seen for days. He reeked of whiskey and was wrapped in a heavy bearskin coat, his dark form almost melting into the night. Julian asked if this was all he ate. Sam ignored him and reached for the roll, but Julian seized his wrist. In the moonlight, his hand looked even more swollen and grotesque. Julian stared down at it for a long, silent moment. He asked if the kitchen work was so hard, how his hands had gotten into such a state. He said it with his jaw clenched, as if he were angry. Sam didn't know what he was angry about. The powerful always crush the weak in this city. Julian should have understood that better than anyone. When Sam didn't answer, Julian sighed and took his other hand, tucking them both inside his coat to warm against his chest. Sam hated it when he acted like this. He tried to pull his hands away, but Julian's grip tightened. In the struggle, a scab tore open, and fresh blood welled up. A sharp pain made Sam flinch. Julian watched him, his eyes fixed on his face. Then he smiled, the familiar, malicious smile Sam knew so well. He told Sam that if he knew pain, he should learn to be obedient. He suggested that if Sam would just beg him, just once, he might soften. Sam laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. He asked what he should beg for. To be allowed to stay by Julian's side like a dog, wagging his tail for scraps? Julian's expression turned to ice. He remarked that Sam's mouth was still incapable of saying anything pleasant. Sam retorted that if he wanted to hear pleasantries, he should go to his lovely wife. He was sure she could coo sweet nothings in his ear all night long. Before he could finish, Julian lunged, crushing his mouth with his own. It wasn't a kiss. It was a violation, a savage bite. His tongue, tasting of whiskey, forced its way into Sam's mouth, a punishment and a release. Julian pushed him against the cold stone steps, the sharp edges digging into his back. Only when he tasted blood did he pull away, breathing heavily. His fingers traced Sam's split lip. His voice was a low rasp as he threatened to cut out Sam's tongue if he ever spoke like that again. Sam turned his head and spat a mouthful of blood. He dared Julian to just kill him. Julian's eyes glinted as he gripped Sam's chin. He snarled that death would be too easy. Sam called him a bastard. Julian just laughed, a low, dark sound, and began tearing at Sam's thin clothes, asking if this was the first day he had known him. In the struggle, the roll fell to the ground, landing in the slush and dirt. Sam stared at it, and suddenly all the fight went out of him. His eyes burned. Julian's voice cracked. He asked what Sam wanted from him. Julian's movements stilled. He looked up, the violence in his eyes receding, replaced by a complex, unreadable emotion. He asked why Sam was crying, his tone brittle. He wiped a tear from the corner of Sam's eye, his voice rough but his gaze softening. After a moment of silence, he sighed, pulled Sam to his feet, and wrapped him in the heavy coat, lifting him into his arms. Julian carried him all the way back to the solarium, a private suite behind the main office. Sam had lived here for months before the inauguration. Everything was as he had left it. Even the personal heater he preferred was in its usual spot. Julian set him down on the soft couch covered with a white wolf pelt throw and knelt before him. He took out a jar of ointment and began to carefully apply it to Sam's ravaged hands. The cool cream melted into his skin, a gradual warmth spreading through them, accompanied by a faint, tingling itch. Sam tried to curl his fingers, but Julian held them fast, telling him not to move. Sam looked down at him. The warm lamplight cast a gentle glow on the side of his face, giving him a rare, tender appearance. Julian asked him to come back to his old post, promising that no one would bully him again. Sam didn't respond. Ultimately, where he worked and what he did was not his decision to make. Julian didn't seem to mind the silence. He leaned in, nuzzling Sam's face and neck, his voice soft, almost pleading. He murmured Sam's name, saying they hadn't seen each other in 2 weeks, that they had never been apart for so long since they first met. He asked Sam if he had missed him. His hand slipped under Sam's shirt, his cool palm moving back and forth against his skin. He commanded Sam not to pull away, to look him in the eye and answer his next question. "Brother," he whispered. That word was like a hook, yanking Sam back into a dizzying past. He felt himself being pushed back onto the couch, his head thrown back, his own ragged breaths mingling with Julian's deepening ones. Julian demanded an answer, asking if he missed him. Just as Sam was about to speak, a soft chime sounded from the intercom on the desk. An aide's voice, hesitant and respectful, filled the room. "Mr. President," a call from the First Lady's staff. "They say she has been feeling unwell all evening and requests you come see her." The intoxicating, desperate heat of the moment evaporated instantly. Julian pulled away from Sam without a trace of hesitation, the haze in his eyes replaced by sharp concern. He asked when it started and why he wasn't informed sooner. Sam stared blankly at the man who was now straightening his suit and heading for the door. The Julian who had just been panting against his neck. His voice thick with possessiveness, felt like a hallucination. A sharp, absurd pain lanced through his heart. A thought, almost laughable in its audacity, formed in his mind. "Julian," he said, his voice raspy. He pushed himself up, stopping Julian just before he stepped out of the solarium. He asked if this was not just for show, for Senator Prescott. He asked if Julian truly loved Clara. Julian paused, his silhouette framed by the doorway. The snowy light from the window outside played across his face, making his expression impossible to read. After a long silence, he finally granted Sam an answer. 7 years ago, after an argument with Sam, he had run away from Blackwood. He had run into Clara, who was visiting the city for an event. She had seen how miserable he was and had given him a rosewater cupcake. Sam went rigid. He remembered. 7 years ago, that winter, Julian had stormed out after they had fought fiercely over his reckless attempts to contact political figures. Sam had been frantic, searching half the city for him, finally finding him shivering behind a statue in a public park. He had been clutching half of a small, elegant pastry. Sam had asked who gave it to him, but Julian refused to say, so he had dropped it, assuming some passerby had taken pity on him. So that's what it was. The cupcake had come from Clara. A dry laugh escaped him, and the taste of ashes filled his mouth. He had considered so many reasons Julian might have fallen for Clara. Her intelligence, her family's power, her beauty, even the simple fact that she was a woman. But he had never imagined it was because of a cupcake. If that little bit of sweetness was enough to earn her his love, then what of the years Sam had spent freezing for him, shielding him from harm, nearly losing his own life for him? He had given Julian everything, emptied himself completely, only to find it was worth less than a single casually offered dessert. It was utterly, painfully absurd. He fell into a long, deep sleep, filled with dreams of the past. He dreamt of the time at Blackwood when Julian was sick with a fever, his body burning up as he clung to Sam's shirt, murmuring deliriously. First he called for his mother, then his eyelids fluttered open and he had mumbled Sam's name. Brother. He dreamt of the time the director of the facility discovered Julian hidden in his room. To protect him, Sam had knelt on the freezing stone steps for an entire night, his forehead bleeding from hitting the ground, until the man had carelessly agreed to let the matter drop. Afterward, Julian, his lips pressed into a thin line, had clumsily applied ointment to Sam's wounds. His voice hoarse as he swore that one day he would make everyone who had humiliated them pay 100 times over. He dreamt of the night the old president died, when Julian had emerged from a bloodbath of political rivals, walking over the bodies of his enemies and allies alike, step by step, towards the seat of ultimate power. He had looked back at Sam, his eyes blazing with naked ambition and madness, and called for him to come. But then the dream shattered. Julian was in his wedding suit, placing a priceless diamond necklace around another woman's neck. He stood with Clara on a high balcony, looking down at Sam, his expression cold and mocking. He heard Julian's voice say he was just a no-guts thing, hardly a man. Sam woke with a jolt, his shirt soaked with cold sweat. A low voice from above him said he was awake. He forced his heavy eyelids open. His blurry vision slowly focused on Julian, who was holding a bowl of dark, steaming liquid, a ceramic spoon already at Sam's lips. A jolt of fear shot through him, and he instinctively knocked the bowl away. A raw, croaking sound escaped his throat as he demanded to know what Julian was doing. Julian looked down at the mess on the floor and at his own scalded hand, his brow furrowed. When he looked back at Sam, his eyes were red with something that looked like a mixture of hurt and fury. He asked what Sam thought he was doing. Poisoning him? In his feverish state, the treasonous words tumbled out. Poisoning rivals, eliminating threats. It wasn't as if he hadn't done it before. Julian was a snake born in the gutter. He couldn't win power honorably, so he had used the most venomous methods in the shadows. The foundation of his presidency was built on the ruin of others. As the words hung in the air, the atmosphere turned to ice. They stared at each other. After a long moment, Julian began to laugh, a low, cold sound that sent a chill down Sam's spine. He agreed that he was ruthless and that his hands were stained with blood to get what he wanted. He then reached over and picked up another bowl of medicine, this one lukewarm. With his other hand, he seized Sam's jaw and forced the bowl to his lips. The bitter liquid poured down his throat, impossible to resist. As Sam struggled, he heard Julian's voice, practically grinding his teeth. But, Sam, I have never, ever wanted to kill you. After he recovered, Sam was kept on at the residence, nominally as Julian's personal aide. Julian seemed to have forgotten the chasm that had opened between them, forgotten the more than 10 years of their shared history. He treated Sam with a cool, distant formality, as if they were truly just master and servant. Only occasionally, when his gaze fell on Sam, would it be clouded with an indecipherable darkness. One afternoon, Clara came to the solarium herself, carrying a box of pastries. She said the president had been working so hard lately, and she had personally made some rosewater cupcakes for him to try. As she spoke, her eyes landed on Sam. Her smile froze. She stammered his name, asking what he was doing there. Julian continued writing, his pen never pausing. He explained that he had known hardship in his youth, and that Sam had served him day and night. He said that Sam had earned his gratitude. Now that he was getting older and his health was failing, he had decided the scullery work was too much for him, so he had brought him back. Clara forced a smile, murmuring that she understood. Her gaze lingered on Sam for a long moment before she spoke again. She stated that it was her own youthful thoughtlessness that had caused him hardship. She paused, glancing at the young woman standing behind her. She introduced her as Leah, her personal assistant, who had been with her since childhood and was very capable. She then proposed, as a way to make up for her past actions, that Leah be given to Sam as a companion, to look after him. The young woman behind her, though clearly surprised, stepped forward and bowed politely to Sam, her eyes downcast. The room was suddenly so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The First Lady was truly her father's daughter. It was a masterful move. She appeared magnanimous and kind while simultaneously placing a spy at Sam's side and severing the unspeakable bond between him and Julian. Julian finally spoke, asking Sam for his opinion. Sam slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping past Clara's deceptively innocent face to land on Julian's grim expression. He stepped forward and bowed respectfully. He thanked the First Lady for her grace. Julian looked up at him, his hand gripping his pen so tightly the knuckles went white. After a long moment, a contemptuous laugh escaped him. He said he never thought he would live to see the day he would be invited to an aide's wedding. He stood up, walked around the desk, and casually draped an arm around Clara, an act of familiar intimacy. He murmured that his wife was always so thoughtful. He lowered his head, his fingers gently stroking her shoulder, but his cold, dark eyes were fixed on Sam over the top of her head. He said that, with Clara being so considerate, it made him look neglectful. Clara leaned against his chest, her cheeks flushing on cue. She protested that there were other people in the room. Julian cut her off, saying it didn't matter, and pressed a kiss to her forehead like the most devoted of husbands. His voice was crystal clear as he added that it would be a good opportunity for Sam to learn a thing or two about the ways of married life. The arrangement with Leah was to begin in 2 weeks. During that time, Leah visited him a few times. She was quiet and gentle. Though she resented the situation, she knew the fault was not Sam's and treated him with kindness. The night before she was to move in, Sam sat by the light of a single candle and pulled out a small wooden box from under his cot. It contained all the money he had saved over the years, what he had planned to use to start a new life. It seemed he was not destined to have one. He divided the contents into 2 piles. The larger one he would have sent to his parents' old address, in case any family remained. The smaller pile was for Leah. She was a victim in this too, her future ruined by her association with him. As he was making his plans, the door creaked open. He looked up to see Julian. Julian's eyes swept over the small, tidy room, taking in the small decorations Leah had put up, the fresh candles on the table, and finally, the 2 piles of money in front of Sam. His face darkened, becoming as cold and stormy as the snowy night behind him. He asked if Sam was counting out his wedding funds. The phrase sent Sam spiraling back 10 years. A massive hurricane had devastated the coast, sparking riots and unrest. One group of insurgents had even breached the capital's outer defenses. The city was in a panic. Sam, weary of the constant struggle, had only wanted a quiet, safe life with Julian. He had planned that if the government fell, he would take Julian and his savings and flee, buy a small house somewhere and live peacefully. With this goal in mind, he had become obsessively frugal. Julian would often watch him before bed as he counted and recounted his stash of cash. He had asked Sam why he was hoarding so much money, if he was part dragon. Sam had rapped him on the head with his knuckles, telling him that once they left, everything would cost money. He had called it Julian's marriage fund. He still remembered the way the candlelight had illuminated the boy's blush, the way he had stammered that he would never marry anyone, that he would only ever be with Sam. Julian's voice pulled him from the memory, demanding an answer. Sam looked up, a faint smile on his lips. He said yes, that since they were to be a couple, it was only natural that he give her all he had saved. Julian's voice was low as he asked who Sam considered a couple. Sam feigned confusion, asking why His Excellency was asking a question to which he already knew the answer. This arrangement, after all, had been personally approved by him at the First Lady's request. Julian stared at him, his eyes swirling with an emotion Sam couldn't name. He suddenly leaned over and swept all the money from the table onto the floor. He said Sam's name, his voice tight. Sam, trying to maintain his composure, asked what His Excellency would prefer he say. He stood up, clasped his hands, and offered a mocking bow. He said that thanks to the generosity of the President and the First Lady, he would now have a family of his own. He asked if that was more to His Excellency's satisfaction. Julian snapped, telling him to shut up. He lunged, and Sam, caught off guard, stumbled backward, falling onto the edge of the cot. Julian was on him in an instant, his mouth crushing Sam's in a kiss that had no warmth, only a savage desire to conquer. Sam hated it. When Julian forced his tongue past his teeth, Sam bit down hard. The taste of blood filled their mouths. Julian grunted in pain and pulled back. In that brief moment, Sam scrambled away from him, coughing violently. He gasped Julian's name, asking if he had gone mad. Julian wiped the blood from his lips, his eyes glistening like a wounded animal's. But his words were viciously possessive. He snarled that Sam could forget about family, about a wife. This life and the next, Sam belonged only to him. Sam looked at the almost insane possessiveness in his eyes and felt an immense weariness wash over him. He had no strength left to fight. He asked Julian what he wanted from him. Julian seemed to sag, resting his forehead against Sam's. His voice choked with something that sounded like confusion. He said he didn't know. He only knew that the thought of Sam with someone else made his chest feel so tight he couldn't breathe. He asked Sam why that was. Looking at his wounded, stubborn expression, Sam laughed without humor. He said it was simple. The dog he had raised for years had suddenly stopped wagging its tail, and he simply wasn't used to it. Julian stared at him for a long time, his expression shifting through a dozen emotions. A log in the stove popped, and he seemed to snap back to himself. From somewhere, he produced a red silk scarf and suddenly threw it over Sam's head, plunging his world into a crimson haze. Sam cried out, asking what he was doing, and tried to tear it off, but Julian grabbed his wrists, his grip like iron. Julian's hot breath was close to his ear as he said that since Sam's words were so unpleasant, they would do something that didn't require talking. One hand clamped over Sam's mouth, while the other tore at his clothes. The ordeal felt like being flayed alive. It wasn't until the first pale light of dawn crept through the window that he finally stopped. The hand over Sam's mouth was removed. Sam tilted his head back and sank his teeth into Julian's shoulder, wanting to tear the flesh from the bone. Julian didn't move, instead cupping the back of his neck and pressing him closer, allowing the bite to deepen. From a distance, their tangled silhouette might have looked like a pair of intertwined lovers. Sam released his bloody teeth, his voice a shredded whisper. "Julian, you are disgusting." Julian pushed him away and stood, righting his disheveled clothes. He walked to the door, then paused and looked back, his voice colder than his gaze. "Not as disgusting as you," he said, "going to another's bed bearing the marks of my body." The ceremony the next day was insultingly brief. Sam and Leah had just exchanged vows in an empty hall when an aide from the First Lady arrived to hurry them along to pay their respects. Outside the solarium, staffers were kneeling on the cold ground. From inside came the sounds of Julian shouting and smashing things. An aide Sam knew saw him and quickly pulled him down to kneel beside him, whispering that insurgents had risen up in Port City. Sam was shocked. Only a month ago, after the hurricane, the president had allocated a huge portion of the national budget for disaster relief. The aide explained that corrupt officials had siphoned off most of it, and the desperate, starving survivors had rebelled. Before he could finish, Julian's icy voice cut through the air, commanding someone to be dragged out and executed immediately. The door was thrown open and 2 security guards dragged out the limp body of the Secretary of Commerce. There was a flash of steel, and blood arced through the air, spattering the white stone steps. The severed head rolled to a stop right in front of Leah. Its eyes were still wide open, as if in disbelief. Leah, who had never seen such gore, let out a choked gasp. Sam took her cold hand and murmured for her to not be afraid. Julian emerged at that moment and saw them, his already bloodshot eyes turning a terrifying shade of red. He commented on their touching display of affection. He paused, then kicked the head away, saying that it was Sam's wedding day, and seeing blood would be bad luck. Sam didn't dare say a word, pressing his forehead to the frozen ground. The Secretary of Commerce was one of Senator Prescott's men. That single, furious act had not only ended a man's life, but had also shattered the fragile alliance between Julian and the senator. The political undercurrents of the capital erupted into a tidal wave. After several days of silence, the senator's faction launched a ferocious counterattack. Articles of impeachment accusing Julian of tyranny and abuse of power flooded the administration, and the civil unrest in Port City spread like wildfire. Julian worked almost without rest, constantly meeting with his loyalists in the solarium, the red in his eyes never fading. After 2 sleepless nights, his body finally gave out, and he collapsed at his desk. It was Sam who helped him to the couch. He was burning with fever, one hand clutching Sam's wrist, his pale lips moving in a delirious dream. Sam didn't hold him as he once would have. Instead, he knelt and began to pry Julian's fingers off, one by one. Julian's eyes shot open, revealing blood-red sclera. His voice was a raw croak as he asked where Sam was going. Sam replied that he was going to call a doctor. Julian stared at him for a long moment, his lips moving silently, before finally releasing his grip and closing his eyes, his breathing shallow. He told him to go. The doctor arrived with Clara. Since Julian's public break with her father, she had been caught in the middle and had effectively placed herself under house arrest in the First Lady's residence. But today, she had come to Julian's sickbed, personally carrying a bowl of medicine. Despite her composed demeanor, Sam could see from the slight tremor in her hand what she intended to do. She had chosen her father over her husband. She had chosen power over her title. Sam watched as Clara brought the spoon to Julian's chapped lips, his own fingernails digging into his palms. If the president died, the residence would be thrown into chaos. He could escape with Leah. But if Julian died, just as the medicine touched his lips, Julian's eyes flew open. His cold gaze went from his terrified wife to the dark liquid in the bowl. He swept it from her hand. The bowl shattered on the floor, the contents sizzling faintly as they spread across the polished stone, leaving a trail of white foam. Julian pushed himself up, his body weak, and stared at Clara. He thought, he said, that he had treated her well. Seeing that it was over, Clara dropped all pretense and began to laugh, a wild, unhinged sound devoid of all her previous grace. She mocked the idea that he had treated her well. She was Clara Prescott, the daughter of a powerful senator, the most sought-after woman in their circle. She could have married anyone and lived a life of luxury. Marrying him, a bastard who had crawled out of a state-run gutter, was a demotion. She backed away, her wide sleeves trailing on the floor. She asked if he knew whose name he cried out in his sleep. It was disgusting, she said. If he loved that eunuch so much, why had he married her and ruined her life? Her finger shot out, pointing at Sam, who stood in the shadows, her eyes filled with pure hatred. She admitted she had poisoned the medicine. She hated him. She spat that he claimed to have loved her for years because she had once given him a cupcake, but she gave things to pathetic people all the time. Was he supposed to marry every charity case he encountered? It wasn't gratitude. It was a curse. Julian's expression had shifted from rage to a deep, hollow gray. He clearly had no desire to hear any more. He waved a hand, and guards seized her. As they dragged her away, Clara screamed one last, venomous thing. Julian, the biggest regret of my life was that my moment of kindness didn't let you starve to death in that miserable winter. The room was silent again, save for Julian's suppressed coughs. He closed his eyes, and after a long moment, spoke in a voice so weak it was almost a whisper. Sam, Clara's greatest regret was giving me that cupcake. What about you? What is the greatest regret of your life? Sam looked down at him, took a cloth and wiped the sweat from his brow. His greatest regret, he said, was 15 years ago, believing the lies of a little ghost and making a deal that was destined to bankrupt him. The last bit of color drained from Julian's face, leaving it a translucent white. Only at the corners of his eyes did a dark red begin to bloom. His voice was a shattered whisper. "Sam, after all this, you won't even lie to comfort me?" Julian's question sounded less like a powerful ruler and more like the boy from long ago, clutching his sleeve and begging for a little warmth. Sam looked at the stark red against his pale skin, and after a long pause, he replied slowly, "The president has the entire world at his feet. What need does he have for anyone's comfort?" Julian's sickness was like a collapsing mountain. Control of the government fell completely to Senator Prescott. Half a month later, one deep night, the sound of gunfire erupted. The sky glowed red with fire. The senator, in league with the insurgents from Port City, had stormed the capital. The residence was in chaos. Staffers were scattering, trying to save themselves. Leah was packing a small bag. She looked at Sam, her words hesitant. "Sir, let's go together." Sam thought for a moment, then handed her the wooden box with his life savings. He told her to go to the west gate and wait. If he wasn't there by noon, she should take the money and go, and not to wait for him. After she left, Sam sat in the small room, listening to the growing sounds of chaos outside. Finally, he couldn't bear it. He got up and ran to the solarium. The first thing he saw when he pushed open the door was a room full of presidential guards in full tactical gear, and in the center of them, Julian, also dressed for battle. He had come. Julian dismissed the guards, his eyes shining in the candlelight as he looked at Sam. Sam realized the sickness had been a ruse, a trap to draw out his enemies. Julian, his armor clinking, walked toward him without answering the unspoken question. He said he had made a bet with himself. If Sam came, he would let him go. If he didn't, he would never let him go. So he had been hoping Sam would come, and also hoping he wouldn't. But he had come. And Julian was both happy and sad. Sam stared at him, asking what he meant. Julian stopped in front of him and reached out, his cold, armored glove stroking Sam's cheek. "It means I'm letting you go. You're free." Sam looked at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. The sky outside was ablaze, the light reflecting off Julian's armor and the inscrutable darkness in his eyes. He had once said that unless he was dead, Sam would never be free. And now he was letting him go. He asked why. Julian gave a low laugh, his fingers lingering on Sam's cheek, smelling of steel and blood. He supposed he had finally understood. Sam would never be happy by his side, so he would let him go. Of the two of them who had suffered so much, at least one deserved to be happy. He leaned down and pressed a cool, brief kiss to Sam's eyelid. "Go," he said, "and don't look back." At the west gate, Leah was waiting. She pushed a bundle into his arms, urging him to hurry. They blended in with the stream of fleeing staff and slipped out of the gate without trouble. The city streets were also in chaos. The senator's rebels were fighting loyalist troops in the alleys. Fire, blood, and screams were everywhere. Sam shielded Leah, sticking to the dark side streets. Behind them, the grand edifice of the residence grew smaller, consumed by flames and violence. He never once looked back. Once they were clear of the city, Sam asked Leah what her plans were. She clutched his sleeve, her voice timid. She had no home to go to. She told Sam he was a good man, and she wanted to stay with him. They traveled south, stopping and starting, making a meager living with Sam's knowledge of basic medicine and his ability to write letters for the illiterate. News from the capital came in bits and pieces. Julian, with 2,000 loyal guards, had defended the residence and purged the government. The senator and his entire family were executed for treason. Only Clara, the former first lady, was spared. She was sent to live in a convent. When Sam heard this news, he was in a small-town tea house, writing a letter for a farmer. The ink from his pen dripped onto the paper, spreading into a black stain. He stared at it for a long time before continuing to write, his movements slow and deliberate. Eventually, a fragile peace settled over the land. After many months, Sam and Leah made their way back to his childhood village. It was still there, but even more dilapidated than he remembered. His parents had died years ago in a famine. His siblings had scattered, looking for work. With the last of his money, he bought a small, run-down cottage with a little yard at the edge of the village, and he and Leah settled there. A few years later, Leah married a local farmer, and Sam was alone again. Life was simple but peaceful. He grew vegetables and occasionally helped the villagers with minor ailments or correspondence in exchange for food. The events that had taken place within those high walls, the love and the hate, had slowly turned to dust with the passing of time. But sometimes, on the coldest nights of winter, he would wake from a nightmare. Sometimes he was back in the biting cold of Blackwood, sometimes in the suffocating warmth of the solarium. And sometimes he saw only Julian's eyes, by turns dark and wounded, and finally, the calm acceptance in them as he let Sam go. After waking, he would stare at the full moon, then pull on a thin coat and go sit on his doorstep. He would think, uncontrollably, of a cramped room in Blackwood so many years ago, of a skinny boy pressed close against him, promising that one day he would repay him, give him mountains of gold, immense power, everything he had to give. Sam pulled his worn coat tighter around himself and buried his face in his knees. The night wind rustled the dry grass in the corner of the yard. It sounded like someone sighing in the darkness. This, perhaps, was the best and only ending for the two of them.